We're all adults here. Let's talk about our favorite little buttons. All the modern controllers. We have officially gotten to a point where this is getting kind of fucking boring. However, thankfully, I think we're at a point where this is one of the best lineup of controllers we've ever really had. But it's strange because I wish either things were way more standardized or things were more different. Because right now, these controllers are all very similar, but also quite a bit different in terms of what they feature, what some of them may be missing, etc. And I just kind of want to talk about each one and potentially talk about which one is my favorite, because I'm not really sure which one is my favorite as I'm talking about it right now, but maybe if I talk about it a little more, I'll figure it out. First up, the PlayStation 5 DualSense controller. Now, I don't know if a lot of other people think the same way, but I've talked to other people about this, and the PlayStation 4 controller, the DualShock 4, when that originally released, I thought wow, this is an incredible controller. It was phenomenal. It felt great. It had great new features, but as the generation went on, I disliked the controller more and more, and now, I want nothing to do with that damn thing. It honestly just feels flimsy now, and out of all the controllers I've had, that one has constantly just given me problems in terms of just not working. I have so many PS4 controllers that just don't work now. I don't know why, and I can probably do a little something to them to get them to work again, but I've just had a lot of problems with these controllers disconnecting from my console and it not being obvious how to reconnect it. But it also felt the most flimsy. It had the worst battery life. That thing would not stay on for more than 20 minutes. But now we have the DualSense, ridding the world of the DualShock name, which is something when that was originally announced to happen, where it was yep, this is the PS5 controller. It was kind of it's just oh man, they're moving on from the DualShock. How unfortunate. But also people were oh, they're moving on from the DualShock. Unfortunate. Oh no. It's not that big of a deal. It's just kind of a legacy thing of oh wow, they're done with that thing, which is interesting because DualSense it is obviously done just to kind of it's a marketing thing. Oh my god, it's the DualSense? This controller is incredible! But yeah, honestly, this controller feels great. I don't know if this is gonna become a PS4 thing later on, where I'm just I don't like this thing. But yeah, I really love the feel of this controller. It feels heavy in the hands. It feels substantial. It doesn't feel as flimsy as previous PlayStation controllers. Specifically, the PlayStation 3's is really bad about that. That damn controller feels like there's nothing to it. The PS4 controller was definitely a little better, but this is definitely the best. I think a problem with me about this controller, though, is it doesn't really feel like you can ever get, fully comfortable with it. And what I mean with that is, really treat it like garbage. This feels like it's this little prince's controller, it's just oh, treat it with respect, treat it as if it was royalty. It just looks so futuristic and advanced, where it doesn't really feel like you can just kind of treat it like a normal video game controller you can just beat around. But because of that, out of all of the controllers of the current generation, it feels the most futuristic. It feels the most next gen. A lot of its features were kind of pioneered by the Nintendo Switch, at least with this current generation of gaming, specifically HD Rumble, as the Nintendo Switch puts it. A lot of the DualSense's cool features kind of comes from its really advanced rumble, its really advanced triggers, basically allowing the triggers to have much more resistance during specific moments in games. When you're firing a gun with the trigger, it's going to shake a little bit, and it might just pose a little bit of resistance sometimes. And yeah, I can understand why a lot of people are I don't like that. I can definitely see it getting in the way and also being kind of a nuisance. I remember in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, whenever I'd fire a gun, it would feel like the trigger kind of clanks a little bit, and that was kind of cool, but I can also see that getting really annoying. So thankfully, in many games, you can turn that off. And while you can turn some things off, a lot of things just feel a little creepy, though. There's a microphone in this controller, and by default, it's on. It's always on, and when you get a trophy in a PlayStation game, it records what's going on when you get that trophy. So, yeah, if you screech at the top of your lungs and say some truly heinous shit, yeah, you're kind of fucked. And yeah, you can hit this button and you can mute yourself. However, it just feels kind of weird because when you mute the controller, the light turns on here, and that just kind of makes it feel like they don't want you to mute the controller. Just that light being on implies that it's kind of like, it's just like, oh, what are you doing? It feels like you're wasting battery by muting the controller, which feels like the opposite of what should happen. You should save energy by muting the thing. Which I want to save as much power as I can with this controller because the battery life is horrendous. Lucky if you get like 4 hours out of this. It's pretty bad. And I understand there's a lot going on in this controller, but when you kind of get down to it, it's definitely more advanced than the Switch Pro controller, but it does kind of have a similar feature set. It has more, but it has a similar feature set. And when this has like 20 hours of battery life, I just start to question things. Like, what's going on here that truly makes it like 15 hours less battery life? Like, it's just annoying. And yeah, you have the touchpad brought over from the PS4 controller, so, you can continue not using that, and it uses USB-C to charge, which is a welcome addition. Overall, I do quite like the PS4 controller. I feel like its features still feel really cool to this day, even 2 years into the console's life. I feel like they are genuinely like really fun and cool features. They may not be game-changing, but they do make this controller stand apart. It makes this controller feel unique. It makes the PlayStation 5 feel unique, and I feel like it kind of makes me prefer playing games on the PS5 to like the Xbox Series X, just because it feels like a more next gen and unique experience on the PlayStation 5, mostly due to this controller. Which in comparison, the Xbox Series X controller and Series S controller, well, this controller design has been tested by time as like pretty much perfect. It is one of the best controller designs. But like, this is it? Looking at this compared to like the Xbox One controller, yeah, they pretty much added this little share button, which I have never used. Everything these days is all about like, oh man, give us the quickest possible way to share this to social media. I'm just like, what an embarrassing feature to add to your controller when that's pretty much like the only major feature added. Pretty much some of like the only major things they did with this controller is kind of just retexture some things. The triggers have a bit more of a grip to them compared to the Xbox Ones, which these are a lot slipperier. This has a much more fingerprint heavy coating to the trigger, which definitely makes it a lot easier to slip off of. The Xbox Series X controller has this rougher texture to it, which does help you kind of just stay locked in there. The D-pad has this different design. I'm not really sure if it's necessarily like better. It's a little better, I think, but it's just kind of different. Like that's just my opinion between the two. Like it's just like, yeah, this is probably a little better, but at the end of the day, I don't really think it matters much. I mean, believe me, people really care about their D-pads. But to me personally, a lot of the games I'm playing on Xbox, I'm not really using the D-pad on, so it's just kind of like, I think what's nice about this controller is that it is simpler. There's not as much going on here. Still, it just uses AA batteries, which, hey, you can kind of say like whether that's convenient or not. You do have the option. I think that's what Xbox is really advertising with this. You have the option to use batteries, or you can get one of their play and charge kits. And that way you have the best of both worlds. Of course, you have to pay for the play and charge kit, but you have that option. But the simplicity does keep the price down. You'd think. For how many less features this has compared to the PS5 controller, this one isn't like that much cheaper. I mean, look at the prices of Xbox controllers. This is like $65. And it's like, this doesn't have like that much different compared to like the Xbox 360 controller. And that was like significantly less when that system was new. Of course, prices change. I think we all have to get used to that. Things are gonna be more expensive these days compared to like 10 years ago. But it just feels weird when the competition has significantly more features in their controller, yet this one is pretty comparable in price. I think one of the big things this controller is missing is a gyroscope. I'm just like, come on. I understand like a lot of the people that are buying Xbox games, like they don't want a gyroscope in their controller, but it's just because like they think of it as like, oh man, if there's a gyroscope in my controller, they're gonna make me move my fingers, and I don't like that. I understand Xbox gamers, we have a lot of bad memories of motion control, but gyroscopes in controllers are very useful. You can just look at gyro aiming in games on PlayStation 5, on Nintendo Switch. It is a good feature to have. It's something that's just non-intrusive, really damn good. It's a good option, you know, like if it's the only option you have, it's kind of annoying, I get that, but it's like, I like having that as an option. It's good for accessibility purposes. Thankfully though, Xbox did put out, you know, the Xbox accessibility controller, which literally makes it like possible for so many people to play so many different types of games. Which, hey, I mean, like if the standard controller doesn't have a bunch of different features, at the very least, Xbox does offer that, but I just kind of wish their standard controller had a couple extra little doodads in it. This is the same damn controller that released with the Xbox One with like a couple of texture changes pretty much. But at the end of the day, this is a controller that's never truly going to go out of style. I can see this at the end of the generation being still like a really damn good controller, where the PS5 controller, I feel like it's a little more up in the air. I kind of feel like my opinion of this controller may lower as the generation goes on. Where the Xbox controller, it's boring, which is, you know, kind of a fault, but it's also like, that's kind of a pro of it, honestly. Some people want a boring controller, and for that, Microsoft offers this. But I also feel like they could offer a more premium controller that includes these features. They sort of did that with the like Elite controller, but even then, that was more like just expensive for the sake of being expensive rather than offering like cool little doodads. Like it's just like, oh man, it's harder to play the game with these triggers. That's awesome. But of course, rounding things out with the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. You know, this isn't the standardized controller for the system. Honestly, like if I was being completely fair, I'd probably, you know, have to use the Joy-Con, but this is the most comparable to the PS5 and Xbox Series X controllers. And yeah, I still adore this controller. I think this is one of the best controllers Nintendo's ever made. It still feels great in the hands. It has this perfect alignment of the buttons, where the triggers are, all of that. At least like this fits my hands perfectly. I remember launch day of the Nintendo Switch, you know, I had to use the Joy-Con and the Joy-Con grip initially for the first couple hours I had the system, and then my Pro controller got delivered by Best Buy a little later in the day, and I got that, I opened it up, I started using the Pro controller, and I threw that damn Joy-Con grip in the trash. This is so much better. The texture, just the feeling of this controller, just feels so comfortable. It feels natural in the hands. It just feels like this section is hard, but it has this like kind of just soft vibe to it that it just feels good. It just feels good. The battery life is fantastic. I think it's definitely like the easiest thing to connect to the console. It's the easiest thing to charge. It's so damn nice to just turn the system on with this, play whatever games. It works with nearly everything. I'd say like one of my biggest issues with it is the placement of the plus and minus and capture and home buttons, just because they're a little too close and a little too similar. Because a lot of times, like when I want to just pause the game, I find myself hitting the home button, or if I'm, you know, want to hit the select button, I end up hitting the capture button. Not a huge issue, but definitely something I've found myself doing from time to time. I also do worry about the longevity of this controller. I found that some of the controllers that I've had, I've just seen like kind of a bit of like marking from twisting the joystick around on the stick itself. Like it's almost like, you know, like it's grinding against these edges. I'm not sure how prevalent that is across like all joysticks. I might be overanalyzing that because I haven't really noticed that with thumbsticks before. I feel like with all the talk around you know, the Nintendo controllers as of late with Joy-Con and Pro controllers just having thumbstick issues, I kind of want to analyze the thumbsticks a little more, and I do notice like, yeah, there is some little grinding marks on the thumbsticks from you know, twisting it around, which, you know, makes sense if that happens to a lot of different controllers, but it's something that I've noticed more with my Nintendo Switch Pro controllers. But yeah, that is something to bring up, you know, like I've specifically seen a lot of Nintendo controllers and also PS5 controllers that have had thumbstick issues, drifting, if you will. Ooh, yeah, that definitely is an issue. I haven't seen as many Xbox controllers have that issue. And I personally haven't had that issue much with my Switch Pro controllers. I think like a Joy-Con or two of mine, I've noticed it happening. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, when it works, this is a fantastic controller. When it gets to the end of the Nintendo Switch generation, I think I can fully settle on if this is like one of my favorite Nintendo controllers. It's definitely up there with the GameCube, but even then, like I feel like the GameCube had more downsides to that controller. I feel like this one works perfectly with so many games, where GameCube, it definitely had some weak points. You know, it wasn't great for certain games. This one is kind of a great jack of all trades. And what I really love about it is that it includes all the features that you need. NFC, motion control, like it's perfect. But which one is the best? Well, it kind of comes down to what your personal preference is. I think these are all great controllers at the end of the day. I feel like the PS5 controller is the most fun for me to use now. Like it's the one that I get the most excited about using, but in a couple years, you know, like we'll kind of see if that's still the case. But the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, I feel like that's like my favorite in terms of the best of all worlds. It has like the extra features that I like. I like the gyroscope. I like the button placement, like the offset sticks of this and the Xbox controller, but I love kind of the softer feel of the Switch Pro controller compared to the Xbox controller. The Xbox controller is a lot more clicky. This one just is a lot softer. And I do like that about buttons. I do like my controllers to have a bit softer buttons. So overall, I'd say this is my favorite overall, followed by the PS5 and then Xbox. But I still love the Xbox controller. I think this is a fantastic controller. It's just a little boring. The PS5, I feel like, is pretty gimmicky in terms of just like, oh man, this is from the future. But it is pretty damn fun to use, and it feels great in the hands. The battery life is really unfortunate, and that's kind of why like the Switch Pro controller is kind of my favorite of the bunch, is just because of like battery life, features, and overall layout. It kind of comes out on top. After this thing, I mean, what other controller has a TV remote button?